just got done with watching the second Terminator movie, Judgment Day, and yes, I am going to review it. So, without further ado, let me get started. Basically, this is the second movie in the Terminator franchise, and it's probably the most well-known and probably the most critically praised compared to the other Terminator movies. Probably because everybody just seems to be more aware of it. It seems when people usually kind of market the Terminator franchise, they usually try to exhibit things that are that pertain to kind of the second movie. I noticed this when I went to Universal, because basically the ride, the Terminator show, or yeah, it's basically more a show, not a ride, but the show based itself more on the second movie. And I think there's a reason for that. I think most people, when they think of Terminator, they usually think of the second movie, which is not something that you see often in movies. Usually people don't really praise so much the sequels as they do the original, but in this case it seems to be sort of in the reverse. Now, do you maybe have to see the first Terminator movie in order to sort of fully understand and grasp everything? Probably. And I'm not saying that it's not watchable without first watching the first movie, but I think it'll give you more of a sense of what everything is, because I think in the second one they tried to make it so that you sort of assume everything and that you already know, oh, okay, this is where it's going and these are what the characters are doing, and it does sort of reference back to the first movie. So even though the Terminator 2 is the one that really stands out, it almost can't survive without having sort of that first movie to sort of set up and establish everything. So, again, just something to be aware of when you go into it. I'm sure it is watchable without seeing the first movie, but I think it'll give you more of a sense of the world, at least, and how sort of James Cameron kind of carries that world in the second movie. And yes, he is the director of this movie, one of his most famous works, action works, I should say. And basically, the plot, from what I can explain to you without sort of not giving too much away, is basically what you have to grasp in going in, is that there's sort of two kind of plots that are kind of going on. One plot involves the T-1000. Now, the T-1000 is basically the main villain in this movie, and he is a sort of robot sent from the future to kill John Connor, the main boy or male character in this movie. And he wants to kill him because he is the only means of resistance to the machines in the future, because the T-1000 is something out of the future, and I guess you could say a very advanced prototype, and something that is trying to eliminate humanity. And you might be wondering, well, why do robots want to do this? Well, it's because there is this particular artificial intelligence system called Skynet, and basically what ends up happening is that Skynet launches the system, and we as human beings create these robots and everything, and we sort of launch this computer system that has data and information. But the problem is that it turns against us. That's kind of the whole point, and that all happens within the future. And that's how the franchise sort of plays it out, and it sort of explains this. But I guess they do have the ability to mess with time. So the machines send the T-1000 to see if it can find John Connor, so that they don't have to deal with the resistance, and then they can just take over the world. And also, John Connor from the future sends Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, the Terminator, back in time to protect his younger self from this T-1000. So yeah, it is kind of confusing when you jumble all of what's happening. Oh, what's happening in the future? Okay, that's what happens in the future, and then what happens in the past. It sort of gets a little jumbled up, but it sort of explains itself, I think, very well in the movie. But I think more clarification can be made, like concerns can be addressed if you watch the first film, because again, it does try to reference back to the first film. There's even one scene where Sarah Connor, she sees her deceased husband from the first movie again. So it's trying to tie the two together a little bit. And I think these two kind of came in close to each other as far as timing-wise goes. And didn't really come into such a split part, like compared to the third and then the fourth one. So again, this one I think is more tied in together, and that would sort of make more sense because again, they sort of came out in a more narrow time frame. So just something to keep in mind. So for the most part, that's pretty much one of the plots that's going on. It's just the T-1000 trying to get John Connor, who is basically a kid in this movie. And he is played by Edward Furlong. Yes, Edward Furlong. Don't know who he is, but as a kid, for some reason I really like his hairstyle as a kid. I have no idea why, I just think it looks cool. But again, that's just one aspect of the plot. Now the other plot, and sort of involves maybe more of Sarah Connor, because Sarah Connor is basically locked up in an asylum because she attempts to blow up one of the systems that could potentially like launch the Skynet program, and that's the whole point. She's trying to prevent Skynet from happening because Skynet means humanity's doomsday pretty much. And so she's in this insane asylum, and we sort of see how her character is very transitioned from the first movie. And you kind of see how the first movie sort of marks this kind of change in her, and you'll see how the events from sort of the first movie kind of reflect on her character. Again, with seeing her deceased husband like in a dream at one point, seeing what's the potential of humanity being destroyed. You do see that, and you do feel that's really empowered her to try to stop it somehow. And it's kind of hard to do when you're in an insane asylum. But basically why she's there is because she tried to blow up that one building. And because people think that she's crazy because nobody believes in Terminators or believes that Skynet's gonna be launched, or they know absolutely nothing about this stuff, except she does, because her husband was actually sent from the future again by John Connor, her son, and he kind of becomes the one to create him eventually. So that's what happens in the first movie, and again, I think it makes it easier if you do see the first movie. However, I am reviewing this one in particular because it was the one that a lot of people seem to like the most. I think that's why I don't really consider the Terminator series so much a classic, just because it's sort of tied in with the first one. And even though the first one I think is decent, it's maybe not as up on par as the second one is. But at the same time, it doesn't really stand out on its own like a classic would, because it is tied to the original work. It's just the Terminator sort of done better, I guess. I think James Cameron really took this really seriously and really tried to make it as good as he could with the amount of technology that he had during the time. And should be said, action's very, very good in this movie, very jam-packed. There's stuff blowing up, car chases, tons of machine guns. If you like really futuristic type technology, definitely the movie for you, because it's just got tons and tons of that. Definitely a lot of stuff exploding and a lot of stuff sort of giving you that sense of feeling pumped and on the edge of your seat. However, at the same time, there's still a lot of character structure as well, with all of the characters, and I'll try to kind of explain that later on. But for the most part, what you have to know about Sarah Connor is basically that she's trying to escape this insane asylum so that she can eventually find some way to stop Skynet from happening, and stop the information from getting out so that people will use it and ultimately destroy the human race. That's basically her goal, that's her mindset coming into this movie. And at the same time, her mindset is also to protect her son, and you'll kind of see a little bit of their relationship and how their relationship sort of works out, and how it's very sort of, it's not really a typical mom-son relationship, because again, you do have all of these things happening to you, and those things sort of put a strain, I think, on how you handle things. At one point in the beginning, she was really mad at him for trying to, save her from the asylum, saying, you know what, it almost seemed like that she didn't want them really to be together. It's almost like she felt like he was sort of a burden, or she was being sort of a burden onto him. And again, sort of interesting relationship, because again, they haven't seen each other for a while, because John Connor, as you'll see in the beginning, gets adopted, and he's not been around his mom for quite some time. So coming into that, it's not really a typical mom-son relationship, as you will probably notice. And also, what I think is also important to note is that as she escapes the sane asylum with Arnold Schwarzenegger's character and John Connor as a young boy, because again, Arnold Schwarzenegger was sent to them so that he could eventually, save John Connor from what ultimately may happen in the future. So that's basically his goal, highlighted in the movies, you will see. And you'll see what they discover along the journey, and basically Arnold Schwarzenegger is a real big key to this movie, because he is a Terminator and he knows things that they don't know yet. So he basically kind of highlights what's going to happen, and it sort of takes off from there. So they go and try to find the information that could possibly launch Skynet, and they also have to deal with the T-1000 who's trying to kill them. So yes, that's basically how these two kind of plots, and you'll see how they eventually sort of coincide and come together. So basically that's all you need to know really going in plot-wise. If you like this kind of plot, as the way I explained it, I think you'll really enjoy this movie, because I think this movie does a good job of trying to take what happened in the first movie and just try to improve on it, and take you into the more interesting, I guess, aspects maybe to the story, and maybe that's why maybe people find this one the most appealing. As far as characters are concerned, Arnold Schwarzenegger probably is one of his better performances, and I usually don't care for Arnold Schwarzenegger, but here it works because he's playing a robot. He doesn't need to emote any emotion. He just needs to be a robot, and he does a good job of being a robot. And I guess that can be hard for some people to have a stiff face throughout an entire movie, but for the most part, he does a good job of being that stiff robot who doesn't understand emotions. And the kid who plays John Connor, again, really nice, and it's nice to see their relationship. I like Arnold Schwarzenegger and John Connor's relationship. They really do try to form this kind of bond. And John Connor tries to teach him sort of more of humans and feelings, and how being a Terminator, you don't understand those things because you're not human. You're not designed to think that way, because you don't have any emotions. You're a robot. So basically, that's how kind of their relationship plays out, and it's really nice to see that. And it feels really realistic, and it feels like what a kid and how a kid would react when he discovered that he had a Terminator who was trying to protect him. Pretty much plays out like any movie probably would, but it does it in a really good way. Sarah Connor's character, again, from the first movie, she's sort of making a sort of transition, if you notice that, if you choose to watch the first film. And then in the second film, it sort of takes off from that transition and then leads her into becoming more and more of a very tough woman. Like, she is really, really tough. One of the toughest, probably, female characters out there, because she's very, very, like, brave, courageous, knows what to do, is willing to take as many risks possible in order to prevent anything bad from happening, does everything in her power to make sure that John Connor, her son's okay. She really cares about her son, I think, and I think she really does want him to grow up in a world where all of these things like Terminators and Skynet somehow cease to exist. However, don't feel like that this movie is going to leave things kind of closed, because again, they do try to make a third, and then they do try to make a fourth. But again, the third and the fourth one are just kind of so split apart, and then they have to change actors and everything. For some reason, it just comes off as just kind of awkward. And a lot of people, I think, are pretty divided on those two, the later ones, the third and the fourth. But it seems like a majority of people really do like the second one. I think the second one is probably the best. Seeing it full the way through, I have to say, it keeps you engaged. It provides a lot of interesting character moments. There's a lot of sort of messages in it as well that can be very powerful and resonative, like the idea of, how something that's maybe sort of inhuman can still care for humanity. That's really sort of hammered in, and there's this whole kind of idea of some hope and in the possibility of them making sure that Skynet never launches. And preventing the technology from spreading and from the information from spreading. So again, you kind of see what happens in the plot and how it sort of unfolds from those two little aspects, again, of the T-1000 trying to kill Sarah Connor and her son, and in particular the son, and how they still have this whole plot of how they're trying to prevent information that will eventually somehow launch Skynet from happening, and trying to destroy all that information so that Skynet never happens. So basically those are what you have to understand. And for the most part, it seemed like Sarah Connor didn't really develop so much a relationship with the Terminator, but it seemed like at the end she still sort of really respected him. It's just they never really share that much dialogue together. It's mostly Arnold Schwarzenegger and the kid, for the most part. And the T-1000, played by Robert Patrick, really well done. Does not show emotion. Is pretty much really a good kind of interesting villain, because again, he doesn't have any emotion. He's a Terminator. All he wants to do is kill. That's what he's programmed to do. So again, it's kind of like that same thing with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but in the reverse, because Arnold Schwarzenegger is programmed to protect John Connor and Sarah Connor. So for the most part, you do see them bond, this John Connor and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's very nice, it's very sweet. And you do feel for the two characters, and you feel for Sarah Connor too, and you kind of understand how some of the other characters that eventually they come across come into play. And for the most part, it's a really good action movie. It's really engaging. keeps you pumped all the way through. Characters very likable again, and you do understand their motivations, you do understand what's going on. But again, it may be helpful if you do watch the first movie, because I think they are really tied together really closely, because again, they came out at around the same time. So for the most part, just very, very enjoyable, engaging, and yeah, it's just a what an action movie should do, and it has good effects for the time, and just well done action scenes, and yeah, keeps you engaged the whole thing through, and you do feel sort of touched at the end. Even though this is an action movie, you can still have some kind of emotion behind the characters, and it's good, I think, when an action movie does it, and I think more action movies should do that. They should provide like us with emotion, us with connecting with the characters maybe to the machines, and you really do feel the connection between John Connor and Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, the Terminator. So I think that's really all I can say about this film. It's really good. I don't really put it as a classic, but I still think it is a really decent film and should be looked at if you really like those kinds of movies. If you like blow it up action and good characters and just a really engaging plot and an interesting one at that, then you'll definitely enjoy this film. But I think that's really all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns, I'm more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye everybody, and I'll be back tomorrow, eventually. I'm doing Alice in Wonderland tomorrow, and hoping that I can cover it, because that's gonna be a lot to cover. But until next time, hasta la vista, baby.